Welcome to the Inspire Health Podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health Podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Inspire Health Podcast. Today's guest is Jules Mitchell. Jules is a Las Vegas-based yoga teacher, educator, and massage therapist. She blends the tradition of yoga with her extensive study in biomechanics to help teachers develop their craft and empower them with education. She regularly contributes to yoga teacher training programs and leads workshops worldwide, balancing the somatic aspects of yoga with the most current exercise science. Bringing the most useful and applicable pieces of that science into the yoga community is her passion, even when it invokes a discerning analysis of tradition. Her book, Yoga Biomechanics, Stretching Redefined, is now available through Handspring Publishing. That is the book right there if you are on YouTube and you want to take a look at it. It is a masterpiece. I can imagine how much work that took.
It almost killed me.
Yeah. Jules, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Of course.
Yeah, as I was reading through your book, I was thinking, oh my gosh, that must have taken you a long time. I know from myself doing theses and stuff, it's a lot of work and years
Yeah.
and
Well,
years
this was
of
worse than the
stuff.
thesis. This was way worse than the thesis, because the thesis, at least nobody's reading. so I didn't worry so much about it. You know what I mean? Like the thesis was like an experimental test ground. This, I was like, okay, now people are going to actually pay money for it. So this, like, it had to be better.
I know, I get that too, for sure. Now, Jules, how did you end up in this world of kind of combining yoga? I mean, I didn't know you were a massage therapist, so I just started checking things out, but that probably makes sense too as to why you've got such a focus on biomechanics. But really dialing in the yoga and the biomechanics piece of this sort of, multifaceted tradition and really focus in on the asana part of it.
How did I get here?
Yeah, give me a little background.
Yeah, I mean, it was a 20-year path. It wasn't, I didn't wake up one day and say, I have this great idea. I had yoga was first. Yoga was just kind of part of my life always. I discovered it as an undergrad, and it just was my life. So, fast forward 10, 15 years, I'm teaching yoga. And I'd had again, life happens. I'd had, kind of a complicated, 20s and 30s with my parents being sick. So my parents were both academics. So it was clear I was going to go to graduate school, but I couldn't because I'm the oldest sibling. So my life was really revolved around taking care of them. And my father was an engineer, so I'd studied a lot of engineering and almost actually, I was studying an undergrad engineering program, a second undergrad. And then mom got sick and I had to withdraw from that program. So just, again, this didn't just unfold one day where I woke up and said, this is what I want to do. Just all these things in life happened. Mm-hmm. And then finally, after both parents passed, I was like, okay, I'm ready for grad school. I was like my late 30s already. My younger sister had gone when everybody else goes, because, I was the one in charge. I was the older one. So I put everything on hold for me. And I was living in Las Vegas at the time, and I went to the kinesiology department just to interview them. And I was already teaching yoga, and I had all these questions, and I've been to every single yoga conference and workshop that you could imagine. And the answers were always contradicting. I felt like I couldn't get a solid answer. All I could get was people's opinions, and it was frustrating me. And so when I was in the kinesiology department, the dean of the program looked at my transcript and my resume, basically was like, you have a background in physics and math. And she was like, oh, we're putting you in the biomechanics route. And I was like, what is that? I didn't even know what it was. And she explained it to me. I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, but I don't really have a huge biology background. So I'm concerned about this is a graduate program. And she's like, you can learn biology. She's like, that's easy. She's like, what's really hard is teaching people who aren't math oriented physics and math. And so like we struggle retaining biomechanics students. And so I was like, okay, all right, I'll do it. And then again, life happened again. And 3 years later, I ended up in California and enrolling in a program there. And I literally sat in my first biomechanics course, graduate level course. And like my jaw was hanging open. I was like, this information is available about connective tissue behavior. Like what? Like I'm like looking around the room, like, aren't you all? And they're all a bunch of 20-year-olds or 22-year-olds because it's graduate school, and I'm like in my late 30s going, like, it had real life application to me. They're all bored. And I was like, oh my God. So I just kind of continued with the program. And then I just spent all my time trying to figure out how this information could be translated to be useful to yoga teachers, because it's not immediately useful. Do you know what I mean? Like understanding the stress strain curve doesn't actually make you teach a better downward dog. But I knew that in this information were what was the answer to the question. So I spent all that time in school, like trying to ask a better question so I could use that information to inform it. And I realized that half of my questions weren't phrased well, and that's why I couldn't get answers, and nobody knew answers, so it was a 20-year process.
Well, and sometimes even when you know how to phrase the questions better with more information, whether or not you're still going to get a better answer might not always happen either.
Exactly.
But that makes me curious, what were some of the questions that you had? Because I mean, you're not going to be alone in that. I think this is like with any sort of field. People start to develop questions when they are getting taught something that maybe makes sense to a certain point, but then maybe the reality inside your body or what you see starts to make you want to question it. So what were some of the things that you did end up questioning that you were having a hard time finding answers to?
I mean, everything, like every single thing that we would say in yoga, from, alignment to position to safety to what the point is, what is the effect that the pose is having, to, I mean, just everything about stretching. I remember I was in my thesis advisor's office, and she was really great. She was like, she kind of, she knew I was different than a lot of the other students in the program because I already had a career path. Like I wasn't like trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grow up. So she really like steered me toward the thesis project, which was like, she was like, write a thesis project as if you were writing a book, because that will help you in your profession. Like, she's like, don't collect data on someone. That's not gonna, like, you don't need to be published. That's not your thing. So that's what I did. And so I decided I wanted it to be about stretching, because I like had all these questions about overstretching and injuries and all this stuff that we said that I didn't understand. And I was dealing with a hamstring tendinopathy and a shoulder thing and a hip thing, like we all are, and so I was getting a little older, of course, when you're 23, none of these things bother you, but, I was a little older, and I was like, what's happening? So I had all these questions, and I remember we were looking at a photo that I had taken of me in the biomechanics lab from the sagittal plane doing downward dog. It's actually the inspiration for the cover of my book. So I had this photo, and I had uploaded it into some software. Yeah, exactly. So I had sent the artist the picture of me from graduate school, and then he made that rendering. But so I had taken this picture of me in downward dog and done all these angles, and was calculating using trigonometry the way you do in biomechanics and ground reaction forces and everything. And I was calculating just different forces at different joints. And she looks at the photo and she goes, okay, so why don't you figure out how much force the hamstrings need to produce in order to hold the pose? And I looked and I was like, but the hamstrings are being stretched. Wait, they have to produce a force? I know nothing. You know what I mean? Like at that moment I was like, it was just such an obvious statement to her. And I was like, what? Whoa, and so then I was like, okay, so I'm really going to focus on stretching, because that was really what we talk about most in yoga. Like stretching is inherent in every pose, and in some way, most poses. And so I was like, okay, clearly I don't know anything about this. And she literally said to me, she was like, okay, well, why don't you start with muscle? And I started with muscle, and the muscle biomechanics is so complicated and almost not that relevant, you know? And so I was like, okay. And then I kind of dug deeper and was like, except all the injuries that we deal with are all in the connective tissue body. Like it's all tendons and, you know, and meniscal things and, you know, it's all, and cartilage, it's all in the collagen based tissues. So then I kind of shifted toward that and then went back to muscle once I felt a little bit better equipped to dig through that research because it was so complicated and I was really new to a lot of these topics.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I would say after going through your book, as much as it talks about redefining stretching, stretching is
Mm-hmm.
not really the main thing you talk about. I would say probably your main
No,
message after reading it would be
no.
really to try and give people some tools to become better critical thinkers. I think that seems to
Mm-hmm.
me like almost the message you're trying to get
Yes.
across to people. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Or okay.
Yeah, I mean that emerged as like a subplot. You know what I mean? Like, um, you know, it is, I mean, I did redefine stretching in the sense that the way I talk about it in my book is any tissue under tension, you know? And so like chapter 2 is about stretching, and near the end of it, I'm like, and that's why we're not going to talk about range of motion anymore, because it's just not that interesting. And it's actually like, it's actually way more about you know, the person as a whole and all kinds of other things that, and if we're talking about pulling on tissues, there's some really magical things that happen, you know, that whether you're doing a traditional stretch or not, you know, what, like if you're, you know, if you're just doing, if you're contracting a muscle, you're putting tension on your tendons. So let's talk about tension, because that as a biomechanical term is like really fascinating. And then, by the way, if we're going to have these conversations, we have to think really critically and we have to define our terms very, very clearly, because if we put forth language that we use like, you know, colloquially, we're not going to be on the same page. And so that's how the like subtext of the like critical thinking really emerged. So I had to put it
Mhm.
in there.
Okay. And the other, I think, central part that comes out is the ability to bear load. That seems to be like a more
Mm-hmm.
important piece than the concept of just stretching. So
Mm-hmm.
can you just break down a little bit about what you mean by the ability to bear load and how that plays out in, say, not just a yoga asana practice, but really in any kind of exercise, anything that we're doing? What does that mean, and how does that
Well,
applicable maybe for when you're teaching yoga instructors?
you know, when I got my first education, um, and you know, then through yoga, you know, not an academic education, through yoga, you know, the narrative, the driving narrative was, if something doesn't feel good, like if it's painful or whatever, avoid it because you'll hurt it more. And it was very like the safety narrative was based in fragility and avoidance. And maybe that's because we live in a litigious society, you know, I mean, it's a bigger thing. But it now, like years later, I look like I joined a commercial gym and I was onboarded um, with like some free training sessions. And one of them was, you know, a young personal trainer who has that same narrative. So it's interesting now because I'm super patient with it because I see it and I recognize it. But, you know, it's not just in yoga, you know, personal trainers are getting this message, Pilates teachers are getting this early on. And I understand, of course, we all have one thing in common, and we don't want to injure our students. The problem is if you never expose it to load, you'll never increase its ability to be exposed to load. So it's kind of like a negative, it's like a reversal of common sense almost, you know? And
Mhm.
so for me, what was really groundbreaking was like, oh, like maybe if I just get stronger, or maybe if I just, you know, if it's kind of, you're not always getting stronger, but strength helps always. But sometimes even just exposure to load, whether you're getting stronger or not, has this beneficial effect and people feel better. I mean, that's what physical therapy is for. Like you literally go and do exercises, you know, and you're doing the exercises that you're doing in the gym and at yoga. You're doing planks and glute bridges. And so why is it like, why is it, should I avoid it in my yoga class? And so I just wanted to be able to think clearly and be able to distinguish the two instead of just having the only option, oh, your shoulder hurts, then this class isn't for you. Now I'm like, oh, your shoulder hurts? Okay, great. You're in the right place. Everything we do in this class, you're going to be able to do. None of it's going to be reckless, and if at any point it's too much, you stop and you rest and you're in charge of yourself. But I'm confident that I'm not like, before I would have been like, don't do anything. You shouldn't be here. I can't help you. And that's really disempowering to the student who came to yoga to feel better. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So
So,
that's a good point, though. So what does that kind of practically look like then? So it's not necessarily saying, well, you've got say I mean, some common ones. I think lots of people end up with like hamstring
yeah.
sort of tendinopathy or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than not going into a position or saying, well, if that hurts, then stop doing it, what
Mm-hmm.
might be a progressional way of working with that that would be therapeutic for the person rather than just stopping it altogether, so that they could still incorporate aspects of their practice, but that will actually be beneficial as opposed to that could actually be detrimental.
Well, now we're asking what is detrimental and how is that determined? And, this is a complex thing because we don't diagnose and treat things, which, I reiterate many times in the book. So it's a complex question. Um, and it really fits into scope of practice and so on. But the kind of way I see it is if they're cleared to come to yoga, right? Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like if they've gone and seen medical help or, healthcare, they've gone through the healthcare system and they're fine and they're cleared to go resume normal activities, which includes a yoga class, then they're fine to load their hamstring. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
I think that's where it's like, we get kind of like, oh, well, you're going to hurt it more. Well, they wouldn't have been cleared to come to live their life if they were going to hurt it more. Of course we have good days and bad days. And now you have to start getting into pain science, which is also very complex. But, we don't want to push into situations that will cause someone to become more sensitive or more sensitized or, in a flare up, but it doesn't mean they can't do anything at all. And so one of the just simple rules of thumb is to pull back from end range, use the muscles that support that joint. And over time, and sometimes time is like years, that's the other thing. People want to feel better tomorrow. And sometimes it takes a very long time. So, slowly and gradually over time, reintroduce end range. And it's a simple rule of thumb. And if there's a bad day, then if, the next day they're too sore, then they did too much and they need to back off and do a little less. And it's a constant monitoring. But what I think the old system and the way I was educated was that somebody came in, I had no knowledge of how to deal with it. So they have no knowledge of their own body because that's not something that we value in our, normal education system. So they would come to me thinking that I, this yoga teacher, understand the human body, and I knew nothing. And so the only option for me was to tell them, don't do it. And that didn't help them and it didn't help me. And they were actually relying on somebody for information that didn't have any. So now when they come, I have enough information that I can support them and actually put it back on them. Like, you're in charge of your body. If you do too much, you did too much. I'm teaching this class. I will do nothing that's reckless, but you might do too many. Your shoulder hurts. If you do too many chaturangas, that's because you did too many chaturangas. I've said a million times that, stop anytime you want to. And so, but now I have the confidence to actually give them the tools to have some autonomy and self-assess, which comes with me being educated in this area. Because when I
Mhm.
wasn't, I was like, oh no, I don't know what to do. Just do nothing. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, that's actually, I found the same thing really in practice in clinical practice, same thing. It's like sometimes people come in and want you to be the one to
Yep.
fix everything or make it better. And ultimately
Impossible.
it's always comes back to the person. So, and ultimately I think that's
Mm-hmm.
really what the practice of yoga ultimately comes back to, is more around
Agreed.
awareness and self-awareness, right?
Agreed. I mean, and that is the just that sense of embodiment and, and enhanced proprioception and interoception is that's why like yoga is such a great tool for all of this. And so by telling people to avoid stuff, you're actually not giving them that opportunity to,
Right.
explore their own embodiment.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a nice way to put it. So just to go back to give someone sort of a practical concept, if people aren't too familiar with even what that means around bearing load and all these sorts of these terms sometimes that people might not be familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I would say probably majority of people would think that when you are in a yoga practice, mostly you are stretching your hamstrings. So what
Mm-hmm.
might be an exercise where you would give an example of how someone would actually engage their hamstrings, maybe not go to full range, but then engage like something like say Dandasana or something along these lines. How would you
Mm-hmm.
modify that to help someone start to get a sense of what that means?
I mean, I would teach them like the whole first section of the appendix in my book is like just teach them hamstring bridges, glute bridges, but hamstring biased. So, like extended, the legs longer. Teach them to find their hamstrings. I find that most people that have spent many years in yoga have been programmed to like shut down their hamstrings. I mean, they're obviously always on, but this idea of letting go to lengthen, because the hamstrings especially are such a tough muscle to stretch. And so it's this narrow, they don't even know where to find them. So teach them that first. That alone, I mean, I do the sequence that's in my the beginning of my appendix. I do at weekend courses with people. We just go through it, and like the second one, people are already cramping in their hamstrings, and like they're like they're like, what? I didn't even know I had a muscle back there, I'm just always pulling on it. So that would just be my first step, is teach them how to contract a muscle, specifically the muscle that they're used to just, pulling on. And then from there, once they know what that feels like, then you can start to contract these muscles in lengthened positions. Now you can be in Dandasana and you can start to feel, but if you don't know what it feels like, then it's going to be harder and harder to do in lengthened positions. And so I always just try to bring it into neutral and start there,
Mhm.
So glute bridges. And if you're in Dandasana, do Purvottanasana, like have someone lift the pelvis and feel like drive the heels down and feel the hamstrings. I think that's the first step.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and I like that too. As I watched a couple of videos you did on some of that stuff, and I like the way that you progressively move them through it. And again, sometimes just as simple as like you said, go into dorsiflexing your feet, get your heels down so that you engage that posterior chain a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
and you can get up and then
Mm-hmm.
start to feel it, as opposed to
Yep.
feet down, you're going to feel a little more up in your quads and whatnot. So just those little subtle
Mm-hmm.
changes that can get people to feel it in their body.
Yep.
What have you found over the years, or have you, as far as in a sort of, I should say, probably more of a Western based asana practice, because I really think what we do in the West is not quite what it was originally designed like. And I think there's
No,
a whole
not at all.
slew. I did an interview with another lady, Hallie Schwartz, who out here in Toronto. She's one of the main teachers on the philosophy and everything. And she said, yoga is kind of like walking into a room, and you go in the first tenth of the room, and that's asana. And then a lot of times in the West we kind of stop there, and then we assume that that's all of what there is to yoga, when really you've
Yep.
only just opened the door and gone in. And sometimes I think that's why we run into different troubles, because we are sort of taking a piece of something much larger. Almost makes me think
Yep.
sometimes when we take like an aspect from a plant that we make a medication out of, and it can be really powerful,
Yes.
but it also has the potential for so many quick side effects, because you're only sort of using one small part of it without all
Yes.
the other synergistic pieces. Um,
Yes.
but
Good
given
analogy.
that, but given that, that's a good one. That just came to me. But
Mm-hmm.
but given that, and sort of an asana practice in the West, what have you found are some of the more classic imbalances that maybe you've seen, either muscle imbalances or frequent types of injuries that you find? Because I know clinically when I see things, there's certain things I see pretty regularly, not just with the yoga population in general, but sometimes it can almost be enhanced sometimes when people are doing exercises and they have certain classic imbalances going on. So imbalances and frequent common injury areas that you think could be quite preventable.
So yeah, okay. I don't tend to focus so much on imbalances for a couple of reasons. It's just not within the scope of what a yoga teacher needs to worry about. And secondly, like, how do you know it's an imbalance? You need you need lab equipment and whatnot. So I feel like that it's just, I try to simplify things for yoga teachers. Like, we don't need to tell everyone all these, so I tend to kind of avoid that. Like, it's not super important. If they want to talk muscle imbalances, they can go see their physio or their doctor, that kind of stuff. What's really about is just, using yoga as a tool to empower people in their bodies. And I think a lot of the injuries that we're getting, they're basically, what I'm seeing, in my opinion, is that people just aren't good at strengthening. Like, they're just not good at finding their muscles. Like, the shoulder stuff, like, anterior shoulder stuff. It's because people they can't do a push-up, yet they're lowering into chaturanga 40 times a class or 20 times a class for 7 years. Do you know what I mean? And but then when you ask them to actually do a high quality push-up, they can't. So they have no upper body strength. And if we actually want or same with the hamstrings, like the example I just gave. And so hamstring tendinopathy, bicep tendinopathy, like, these are things that you see often in yoga. And then you actually ask them to do something with that muscle group, and they can't. And so I feel like it could be avoided if we could just teach people, again, how to load that area. And it's just not part of yoga education. It isn't. That's what I do. I go travel the world and teach people, and we do all kinds of activities. Like, how can you take this yoga pose and modify it with language or a prop or something, so that you're actually really forcing the person to engage their pecs and biceps? Like, how could be so that they can feel it, because just lowering to the ground, they're just falling with gravity. The example I always give is, you can't make any sort of tissue adaptation by putting a dumbbell on your bicep. You have to resist it. Do you know what I mean? There has to be a muscle contraction. Just all loads aren't the same. And so if we all know this with a muscle, like, if I put a dumbbell on my bicep is not going to get bigger and stronger. So if I don't resist the dumbbell, nothing's going to happen. And the same goes for a lot of the yoga poses. We need to kind of introduce what resistance is like. So people don't, especially yoga teachers, they're not taught the difference between a muscle contraction and a stretch. Like, they don't know. When I do this activity, like, how do you modify a pose? They're all looking for a stretching sensation. And I'm like, but the force vector is coming from the wrong direction. Like, where's the line? Where's the resistance? And they're like, what? Like, so it's not I'm not pointing fingers. Like, this was my education too. I just discovered that there was a huge gap in the education. And I think we can avoid a lot of injuries, the common ones, if we could get people to actually load those areas. They're just not loaded. So it's kind of an underloaded situation, if you ask me. Right. Additionally, like, yoga has this reputation, especially in the West, of like being enough. You know what I mean? Like that's all you need to do. And people, all they do is yoga and live happy, healthy lives. So this is nothing against yoga, but let's look at the demands within your yoga practice. And you have to look at the individual, because people have different practices and different styles. Let's look at the demands. Let's look at the demands in the rest of your life. What else you want to do? And does it match up? Do you know what I mean? So people haven't thought about that. Like, specificity as well, like, adding something new to a program, the body always responds well, but after you've been doing yoga for 15 years, is it as beneficial as it was the first 3 years? Right? Like, this is basic exercise science that isn't taught to yoga teachers, that the better you get at something, the less beneficial it is. It's like there needs to be constant stimuli to the body. So nothing against yoga, but let's look at what it is that you want to achieve, and is what you're doing matching that? And in most cases, it's not, and it's simple to resolve. It's just a conversation.
Yeah, and it goes back to self-awareness. It's sort of reflect back on, is it working? Is it not working? Without any judgment or emotionality around it. Just does it
Mhm.
work or not work, or am I getting the
Mhm.
goals, or am I getting injuries or not, and all those types
Mhm.
of things, and then you can make your decision from there.
Mhm.
Now, a couple of the things in your book, when you talk about, and I just want to break these down for people, maybe how, when they would be more applicable, but say active versus passive stretching. When would one be more beneficial than another? Do you generally use both of them back and forth, or how do you incorporate those?
Um, like in a yoga class or just in general?
Well, to me, I think most of this, I mean, there's definitely people that do yoga and that's their bread and butter, so to speak, of what
Mhm.
their exercise is. I find a lot of people integrate different things. A lot of people do yoga, they move their body, they walk, they go to the
Mhm.
gym. But in general, I think of this as sort of outside of just yoga, but as supportive therapy for people. How
Yeah.
do you stay balanced? When would you be more likely to do active versus passive, or
I mean, it goes back to the individual and the demands that they want, and I mean, basic rule of specificity. Like, if you want to unwind, and I mean, if you want to unwind and relax, then passive stretching is great. It's like that's why we do it at the end of class. Um, uh, is that the most efficient way to get improve your range of motion? Probably not. But like, again, it's like, but do you need range of motion? Like, that's the other thing. Like, I literally lost interest in range of motion through all of this work. Like, it's so like, it's just not exciting. Like, who cares? How much range of motion do you need? You want to reach the top shelf? Okay, then let's practice reaching the top shelf. Like, why would I do a stretch over here to reach for the top shelf? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't I just get better at reaching for the top shelf? Like, it just seems so much more practical. So stretching for range of motion is, I mean, it's fine. Like, it's just not interesting. I've read 10 years worth of research papers. Like, there's no overwhelming outcome. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, okay, great. But I happen to like the sensation of stretching, so I do it because it feels good.
yeah.
Am I doing it because am I doing it to fix forward shoulder posture? No. You know what I mean? So I think there's a time and a place for everything. It's just, what does the person want? What are they doing in that special session? um, you know I it's it I find it so interesting when we want to do this to get better at this. Like, it would be like, could you imagine if you wanted to get better at the guitar, if your teacher gave you piano lessons? Do you know what I mean? Like, great, you might get better at music theory, but is it going to make you a better guitar player? And so we overcomplicate things. And then it's like, whoa, well, if you want to get better at deadlifting, just deadlift. That will also lengthen your hamstrings. Why would you stretch on the side? Like, it just doesn't, unless you enjoy it, then go for it. Like,
Mhm.
so
Other
it's
than almost do like more of a functional type of exercise that's specific for what your
for
goal
what you
is.
want. Yeah. So, like, if you go into the muscle biomechanics, it's really research. It's really interesting, but there's like so much on like changing the architecture, of the fascicle length and the, pennation angles, and like force production and velocity, and like it's really complex and interesting. And then you can look at a stretching paper and see that this stretching changed the fascicle length and the pennation angle, but once again, I'm like, this is so academic. It doesn't make any. What soccer coach is looking at the best, the best pennation angle for force production to score the goal, and then looking at stretching research and applying that like stretching protocol? Wouldn't he just get better at practicing shooting the goal? Do you know what I mean? I love the academics of it, and it's useful, but it does it make you a better yoga teacher? Not really. And so that's like, I've really spent time like, how can I just make teachers better teachers? Because
Mhm.
all that stuff is cool and fun, and if you're nerdy and you want to get into it, great, but it's actually not going to have you teach a better downward dog. Not gonna help.
Yeah, it actually makes me think a lot. I was at for a series we did earlier on mind, body, spirit kind of connection, and we were at a course on was actually on trauma therapy, and it was looking at with one of the premier psychiatrists that's in this world now, and so he was going through all of this stuff and looking at all the functional MRIs and all of the brain science and kind of showing all this stuff. But the bottom line was like what he then does with his clients, they don't need to know any of that. They just need
No.
to do these very specific little things, and all of that
Hmm.
stuff is going on in the background, so you don't have
Yeah.
to explain it all. But for you to teach it, it helps a lot for you to understand it so that you know how to
Yes.
then direct for the person, or well,
Yes.
for you, for the teacher that you're trying to explain it to.
Yes, I think it's super valuable. It's not
Hmm.
necessary in a 2-day course. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? It's necessary for me for my life's work, and I love it. But the more I know, the better I can filter it, if that makes sense.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah, it totally makes sense. It was interesting too, and you're talking about range of motion, because I would say that is one of the premier ones that we usually talk about a lot of times in an asana type of practice. And what other metrics do you think are important for people? I was actually having a conversation with, I think you know Trina Altman.
uh-huh.
I was talking with Trina about this at one point. It's almost like I wish there was a really good functional assessment that people would do almost before they start any program, whether they're doing weights, sometimes they do this, but before they start a yoga practice, there's not really almost a functional assessment of where are you. That might look at range of motion as one of them, but it might also look at a number of other factors to get an idea of where are you, where are some of the weaker links, what are you capable of doing. I almost think it'd be really good to have a
I just
course that
don't
just
think that
goes
is
through
part
some of
of
that.
yoga. Like I talk about that in my book. Like there's all these biomotor, abilities that we measure things by. That isn't part of yoga. Like, we don't measure speed, we don't measure strength, we don't, like, you can't measure strength without an actual weight. You know what I mean? I mean, I can tell you're getting stronger because you can, do no push-ups and then you can do 10 push-ups. Like, but that's about it. You know what I mean? Um, and it's not like, it's not really, I don't know. That's not what yoga is. Like, if you really wanted to like, it's a cool side effect that you get stronger at push-ups if you build it into your class. But like, really, again, is specificity. If you want to get better at push-ups, you should probably do some push-up training, and push-up progressions, because you're not getting in a class, you're not getting those progressions. And it's like, it's not specific enough. Yes, you'll build strength over time, but that's just a cool side effect. So I think that's part of the problem, is that because yoga doesn't have one of those. I mean, maybe in some situations, balance, like that might have
Mhm.
some, but like it doesn't have anything that stands out. And so that's why I feel like we in the West have defaulted to range of motion, because that's something that we can measurably identify, and our Western brains do that. If you go and take yoga class in India, they don't care about range of motion. You know what I mean? They're like, their cues are like stand tall like a mountain. They're not talking about assessing your forward neck posture and your pelvic tilt and all the stuff that we've brought into yoga. Is it even
Mhm.
necessary?
Yeah.
So I just don't think it's important, not in a yoga setting. Again, like if you're worried about your posture for whatever reason, then go see someone that specializes in that. But it doesn't, like, yoga doesn't have to do all those things. Yoga doesn't have to be responsible for building strength. You're never going to yoga your way to a deadlift. So, it's yoga is about embodiment. It's about the personal experience, which we've kind of already said. So this is a great way for you to get to know your body, to see what you enjoy. It's a perfect place to go inward and then have all of the emotional experiences with it. And then of course, because it's so physical, hopefully it'll spark your interest in other physical forms. I mean, most yoga teachers that I know that have been teaching for more than 10 years are doing other things, because it's like the gateway into, oh, I can do all these cool activities with my body. Do you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I started yoga forever, and now I do everything. I mean, I'm Tai Chi certified. I'm Pilates, gyrotonic. I strength train. I do anything I can get my hands on. I go out of town. I'm like, what class can I take? Um, and to me, that's all part of yoga. Yoga was what taught me about you know movement and activity and awareness. So I just don't think yoga needs to be an assessment.
Mhm. But just then more from an instructor point of view, if you understand those things, then you just build that into a practice, but you don't need to bring all the awareness around what your background information is to the person.
Yeah.
Okay. I think you've talked about this a fair bit too, but what have been the biggest changes for your personal practice over the years then with all of the information you've accumulated through writing your book and whatnot? How's it? I imagine it just keeps evolving and adapting, but what have been the main changes from your personal practice?
I don't know. It's really hard to pinpoint because like so much has happened, like the first thing that happened was as you go from practicing to teaching, you lose your practice. Like, that was the first thing that was really hard and every teacher goes through that. I had my schedule of classes that I would
Mm,
take, and then I became a teacher and that was taken from me because of now I'm teaching instead of practicing. So I had to kind of develop a home practice, so that was hard and challenging. And then at the time it was like my experience of yoga was class related. So I thought my home practice had to be like a class, like, and that was really hard because no one wants to write a class for you to practice. Like, it's just that. So then it kind of changed into just doing random poses here and there. Um, and, and then it kind of became like, well, how am I going to modify these poses with a purpose, like I have a goal of doing pull-ups. So how can I use my yoga? Now suddenly, is it yoga? Is it not? I don't know, And so now my yoga practice is really back to going to an occasional class,
mm,
like that's like, I really go, I don't even like, it's all yoga to me because it's my path, but I now go to a yoga class to be led for the
mm,
Shavasana, and I don't really need all this extra strength stuff because I do that on the side. And, like I want the full experience. And so I go. And so it's like kind of come full circle, but that's right now. I'm sure it'll be different next year.
yeah,
So
but I get that just for the sheer enjoyment of the practice and
yes.
letting yourself kind of get
Mm-hmm.
swept away, being led without having to think too much about anything.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Nice.
It's great.
Well, my wife just taught yoga for a long time too, and that's the same thing. She kind of lost her practice a lot when she was teaching so much, and well,
Mm-hmm.
then particularly after family and kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But now she again will go to classes just
Mm-hmm.
purely to
Mm-hmm.
just be led
Enjoy
and
it.
have that
Yeah.
experience of it. Yeah.
And again, like I go to a class and I know that, like, I joined a commercial gym and one of my friends teaches there, so I go take her class a lot. I know that everybody else in the room is not like me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I know that nobody else in the room has 20+ years of yoga experience and has written a book on yoga biomechanics. So, so like the class is for them. It's not for me. I just happen to jump in on it because I'm doing my own practice.
Mm,
Like, even though she's leading the poses, I've got such a yoga, I'm just doing my own thing. Nobody can tell I'm following along just like everybody else, but it's such a personal experience for me. And I'm just enjoying the fact that many people, this is their fourth yoga class, and they're like trying to figure out all the rules and and like, let them have it. This is what it is. Like, like, nobody should take that from anybody. So I think that's what's so special about it is like what you have to go through all of that. I don't know what yoga is. I don't understand yoga in order to get to a point where you can take a led class and just have your own experience. A new yoga student doesn't have that. It takes lots of practice and cultivation.
mhm.
So,
Yeah, for sure. Jules, out of all of your years of experience in the fields of everything from engineering and yoga and movement and teaching and all of these things, have there been any specific aha moments or insights or teachings or lessons that have really kind of created a more shift in your life? Anything that really stands out that you would share?
oh wow. In all of my years of um, people should study more math.
I'll
I'm
tell that to my
serious.
teenager.
I'm serious. I'm serious. Like people, when I say y equals mx plus b, people get like mortified. So then it's not that, it's just, then I wonder what happened in their education that was not exciting for them. Do you know, like, so now I'm like, I if I could do anything, I would quit everything and go teach college algebra at the high school level or at the college level, at the community college level. It's just not it's not my destiny. Do you know what I mean? But like that is, it's just some basic algebra and trig. You don't even like it somehow it's not presented as useful, but it is. And it's, even if you don't actually do the equations, like I teach it to people and I'm like, you don't have to know how to do this, but if you can just step back and see the big picture, then it's like everything makes sense. Like you don't have to be able to calculate that M is stiffness, but if you can recognize the relationship because you understand a fraction as a relationship, then like all of a sudden this all makes sense. And so it makes me sad that like this is not part of our culture, you know, that it's not in our educational system that kids get excited about this stuff. So, or adults.
Well,
so
it makes me think
that would
like,
be the one thing I would.
I think that's great. Well, and I think part of it is like why it was also so exciting for you is it pulled things together and made sense. It sort of brought an awareness, I think, that you had been wanting to know, and math kind of in a certain way pulled it together for you. I think part of the problem is that it's sort of like it's like in some places they're incorporating things like math with, say, farming or something. So it's like now it becomes this almost practical way of making sense in how these numbers are actually playing into something practical. I think part of the problem with it in school is that it's just not, they don't make it applicable for where is it going to play out in your life, right? So then I think that's where people get this sort of blank look when math comes up. But yeah, I agree with you. When you can make something and pull it together and it makes sense of things, then all of a sudden it becomes purposeful.
Yeah.
Jules, that was wonderful. Where can people learn more about you? Any courses that you've got coming up that we can talk about?
Yes, I'm all over everywhere all the time. So there's not even one that I can promote, just almost every weekend that's not a holiday and that's not summer. I don't teach in summer. And that's not like between, December, January, the holiday chaos. But almost every other weekend I'm somewhere. And you can go to my website. It's just on my schedule page, and my website is julesmitchell.com. And then I have a teacher training, and that I can promote. I have one coming up at the end of May. We still have 2 spots left. That is in Las Vegas, and it's a 300-hour advanced teacher training. So I assume you already teach. If you don't, but you have a strong anatomy background, like I have a nurse who's coming who doesn't already teach, but that's fine, And I'm doing another one in 2021, which I'm announcing the date soon. And that's where we go over all of this. There's a lot of pain science, because I think that's the other side of this. So I bring in a lot of pain scientists to lecture as guest teachers, and then a lot of biomechanics. So
wonderful. Yeah, no, it sounds like a very different aspect that you're focusing on that most people are just not going to get. So I would say even for seasoned yoga instructors, it's the type of training that would round out their education in a whole nother way. So
yeah.
Wonderful. Jules, thank you so much for all of your insights and for this very detailed piece of literature that you put out in the yoga community.
Can I say one thing about that?
Absolutely.
The book is challenging. I 100% recognize that. So I've actually launched an online book club. So your listeners can know about that. And again, you can find out about my website. But we read 1 chapter a week, and we meet on a call like this. And I send discussion topics, and you submit questions. And so then you have like direct access to me translating each chapter. And it's been really successful and really fun. So if you're like, if you have the book and you're like, what is happening? Then join the book club. It's really valuable. So you have 6
awesome.
hours of access to me.
That's a great idea. What a great idea.
It's been really fun.
All right, Jules, thank you so much. And I will make sure all your information is in the show notes for everybody. Okay. Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.